Hello, good day to one and all. This is Miss A. Krishna Sundar, Assistant Professor, Department of English, KAHM Unity Women's College, Mancheri. Today we are going to discuss one of the most prominent essays written by Jacques Lacan, and the title of the essay is The Mirror Stage as Formative of the Function of the I as Revealed in Psychoanalytic Experience. We have already discussed a number of terms related to these concepts. We began from Freud discussing the terms like id, conscious ego, etc. We have also discussed what mirror stage is. We have gone through the imaginary, symbolic, and real, the tripartite stages defined by Lacan in the process of psychosexual development. So, this essay is basically a repetition of everything that we have already studied. But many of these terms actually developed and evolved after the publication of this essay. But since we have already covered many of the concepts related to the essay, this essay is going to be very easy for you. So, since this is a theoretical essay, I am not planning to go line by line, because if you learn a theoretical essay line by line, word by word, it is not going to be very feasible from the exam point of view. So, when you study a theoretical essay, there are two things that you have to concentrate. Now, the very first thing is you have to understand the concept or the idea that has been depicted in the essay. The second thing is that you should know how this concept or idea can be applied to literature. So these are the two basic things that you should understand when you learn a theoretical essay. Instead of learning it line by line, word by word, this would really help you to analyze and understand the essay. So you need to understand the concept first, the idea put forward by the author, and how this idea can be applied in literature. So I'm just taking this particular point of view and discussing the essay, which means the unimportant areas would be completely omitted. So the idea, the main focus here is to give you the version or the concept which has been narrated by the writer into a capsule form, so that you understand the basic idea and would definitely help you to write an essay based on this from exam point of view. So let's start with the essay. The mirror stage as formative of the function of the I as revealed in psychoanalytic experience. So we have already studied mirror stage. So someone who has already understood what mirror stage is, this essay is going to be just a piece of cake. Now, much of the talks Lacan gave formed the basis of his book Ecrits. He has done a lot of seminars, he has done a lot of presentations, he has done a lot of writings, and all these papers and writings have been published later in the name of the book Ecrits. Now, this was translated by Alan Sheridan. This particular essay was translated by Alan Sheridan, and Lacan begins by stating the concept of I, which he had already stated 13 years ago. So this is the second paper that he is actually presenting, which is related to the mirror stage and the function of I. And in this essay, he has connected this particular idea with a lot number of other concepts. So structuralism is coming in here. There is post-structuralism coming here. There is surrealism coming in. Now we have already discussed how structuralism is connected when we talk about this psychosexual development in connection with language. So this is how structuralism peeps in. Now the main contributions of Lacan includes subjectivity and desire, a lack, otherness, identity formation, which is actually beginning from the function of this I as revealed in psychoanalytic experience. So moving on, this is actually the second version of a seminar on mirror stage. Remember, In an earlier version, 13 years ago, he had actually delivered a lecture based on mirror stage. But in the 14th Congress, that is something which happened 13 years ago, it was rudely cut short by the President Ernest Jones. So later, in the 16th Congress, he is again delivering the second version of the same seminar. So that is again based on mirror stage. So now what is this essay about? So you need to understand the basic concepts here. So the entire essay actually revolves around the concept mirror stage. So the basic concept of the essay is rooted with the mirror stage. So just to brush up your memory, what is this mirror stage? Remember, a child or a baby who is 6 months old will definitely look at its own image in the mirror. And Lacan says that this is the initial stage where a child identifies an image in the mirror. And this identification is actually the beginning process of the formation of I or the self. So this is the very first time that a child realizes that there is something called I or there is something called self. But at the same time, the child believes that the image that he or she sees in the mirror is a better image than the real self. So there is a kind of illusion which is actually peeping in because the child believes that the mirror image is better than the real one. And Lacan here says that this activity of the child, now this can happen from 6 months till 18 months of age. Now, Lacan here says that it is not a moment but a permanent structure which will influence all the human beings throughout their life. So the moment, that particular moment when the child recognizes the image in the mirror, that particular moment is not just a moment, because that particular moment is going to be carried over throughout your life, because that is the first part of the entire process in the formation of I, ego, the self. Now, this mirror stage is actually not a concept which Lacan had introduced. It was initially called as mirror test. I believe you remember the name Henry Wallin. We discussed the same name when we talked about the mirror stage. So it was Henry Wallin who actually introduced this concept, and it was then known as mirror test. Later, Lacan developed the very same concept, and he brought in a number of ideologies based on psychoanalysis, and he renames it as mirror stage. Now, this particular moment throws light on the formation of I. Now, this is another term which is being used. It is good if you can learn a few technical terms from the essay, because these technical terms will make the evaluator believe that you have gone through the essay, you have a very clear idea about the essay. So say this term, aha Erlebnis. Now this is a term which means a sudden insight. Now this process or this particular moment in which the child recognizes its own image, now that moment is considered by Lacan as a sudden insight. And more than that, the child finds a gestalt, which means an organized whole, a perfect image. So the child believes that the image that he finds in the mirror is a perfect image. Kohler sees this as an act of intelligence. So though the child may be just 6 months old, this is considered as an act of intelligence because this is the first part where ego develops in the child. A child is always supported still then, which means at the age of 6 months or even at the age of 18 months, the child is still getting support from the other members because the child cannot walk alone. So someone would be holding the child. So the child is totally dependent on some other human beings. And that is the reason why the mirror image has an impact, because the child believes that he needs support, but the mirror image is perfect. So this mirror stage is actually a stage of identification. So I remains here as a subject of desire. Now please remember this concept, because subjectivity and desire. Now these were other areas where Lacan had actually written a lot about. Now the symbolic matrix of I is actually the reason for the dependent child, because a child lacks motor coordination. Since it is a baby and the motor coordination is not sufficiently going well, the baby believes that the mirror image is far more perfect than his real image. Though there is no social interaction happening now, this fixes the ego in a child. Now, see, ego normally can work only when you are placed in the social space. You need social interactions, you need to meet people, only then your ego starts working. But Lacan says that though there is no social interaction happening now, the child who can view his own image in the mirror actually has some ego working in his mind. Maybe it is not something which has spread its wings completely, but still this fixes the ego in a child. Maybe the roots of ego would be formed here during this stage. So the mirror image serves as a threshold of the visible world. Maybe the child might not have seen the outer world, but still the roots of this ego will be formed in the child during this period. He uses the term subjectivity to criticize the conventional notions of the individual, consciousness, etc. So subjectivity is another important term that Lacan uses throughout his essay. Now I'm not going into the greater details of subjectivity, because subjectivity of Lacan is a very, very huge term. Millions of dissertations and theses have been worked out based on this single term. So you can imagine the depth of the term. So I'm not going into the greater details. What you need to know is how subjectivity gets connected with the formation of I. Now, subject can be divided in different ways. A divided subject, according to Lacan, is something between the consciousness and the unconsciousness. Now, we have already discussed consciousness and unconsciousness. We have discussed id, ranging from the theories of Sigmund Freud. Now, again, the subject of the unconscious, that's again another thing. So the subjectivity can happen in different ways. One is as a divided subject. The second one, the subject of the unconscious. The third one, subjectivity in terms of sex, feminine and masculine. Again, subjectivity in terms of clinical structure. So that is totally connected with psychoanalysis. It includes neurosis, perversion, psychosis. Because remember, all these investigations actually came up during the process of treating people with psychological disorders. So psychoanalysis, in short, treats subjectivity as a mixture of psychic, sexual and linguistic mechanism. Now this sentence is a very complex sentence because it includes three different elements combined together: psychic, sexual and linguistic. So see, psychic means that's again a very huge world. Sexual, a lot of theories are still going on, and linguistic mechanism. Now linguistic mechanism, we have seen different schools talking about the orientation of language, but still no studies are complete. So there are still studies happening based on this linguistic structure, linguistic mechanism, etc. So just remember, this is a very complex area, and psychoanalysis here is actually a mixture of all these elements. That is why structuralism is coming in between, post-structuralism is here. A lot of ideas are put together. So just remember, just understand, these are the contours or the borders through which the ideas are actually revised or rewritten. So moving on, again getting back to the mirror stage, Lacan says that there is a symbolic gap here. Now what is a symbolic gap? There is a gap between the real child and the image. And there is a kind of physical alienation because a child sees the image as the other. And from the gap, the desire emerges, which means the real child will always want to become someone like the one in the image, because a child believes that the image in the mirror is more perfect. So automatically the child has a desire to become someone like as he sees in the image or in the mirror. So, which means to be wholesome again. Now, remember, the real child is not having enough capacity with motor coordination. The child cannot move. Now, see, in your case or in my case, if I want to raise my right hand, I can do it. My brain gives the command and my body is obeying it. You can also do that. If you want to turn your head, your brain is giving the command and your body is obeying that. But in the case of a small child, this coordination will not work properly. Because even if the child wants to do something, his body might not be obeying the command given by the brain. Because that is lack of this motor coordination. Because since it is a child, it is just the developing stage. So, the child will always feel that he is not capable enough to do many things. But the mirror image is capable of doing so many things. So there is a symbolic gap, and this symbolic gap actually brings forth what you call as a term desire. So the desire to become something else. And Lacan says that this is something which is going to haunt you throughout your life, because in human beings desire never comes to an end. Once when we get something, we start wishing or desiring on something else. So this desire is a continuous process psychologically in the mind of a human being. So the child wishes to be wholesome again. Now Roger Calelios, another psychologist, brings in the concept known as legendary psychasthenia. Now just remember the term, it is there in the essay. Now this means how animals can change their physical appearance according to the physical surrounding. For example, chameleon. A chameleon can change its color according to the physical structures. Now this same instance is applicable even to human beings. So this is in fact a psychological experience. Suppose if you are placed in darkness, certain defense mechanisms will work within yourself. Either you close your eyes or you will be covering your face with your hands. So many actions would be coming up from your body because of the command given by the brain. So these kind of experiences, psychological experiences, that is what Lacan is trying to put forward here. So man always has an organic insufficiency in his natural reality, which means man is not sufficient throughout his life, which means he always will get a feeling of organic insufficiency in his natural reality. So mirror stage establishes the relationship between an organism and its reality. So this is another important point that you have to remember, because it's not just the formation of the ego which happens during the mirror stage. Apart from that, mirror stage establishes the relationship between a human being and the real world. And sometimes the mirror image is just becoming an ideal image whereby the child wishes to become the ideal image. And there is a term that he uses, fetalization. And this means intra-organic mirror, which is again the behavior of small babies which could be identified in adults. So this is why Lacan says that there is a very strong influence of this mirror stage in human beings. So again, mirror stage is a stage which takes you from an insufficiency to anticipation. Now see, in both these terms, you won't get an idea of completeness. Insufficient means there is something more, and anticipation means you're looking forward to something. So, in both cases, it is not a complete wholesome. And that is what Lacan was trying to convey to this audience, because he says that human life was never complete. So, from a fragmented body image to a totality. So, this is what the child wishes for. The child lacks motor coordination, and because of that, the child believes that he wants to become the ideal image that he sees in the mirror. And it is actually a desire from a fragmented body to an image of totality. So it is this totality that all human beings yearn for. And Lacan calls it orthopedic. This is a term that he uses. This fragmented body manifests in dreams. So see, this is all interconnected. We are getting back to the dream mechanisms that we already discussed in connection with Sigmund Freud. And he says sometimes disjointed limbs, growing wings. So see, these are all bodily actions. Sometimes you get into these kind of dreams which speak about the functions of body. And he says this is an inclination towards the fragmented body which is manifested in dreams. He compares it to Hieronymus Bosch's vision of hell. Now you can see a picture here. This is a very famous picture it is an oil painting done by Bosch, and it is titled as Vision of Hell. So this is how he pictured hell. So he is actually comparing it with the kind of dreams that we have in connection with the bodily functions. The formation of I is symbolized in dreams by a fortress or a stadium sometimes. So this is again the ego formation structure, which is actually manifested through dreams. It also mentions the defense mechanisms suggested by Anna Freud. So Anna Freud is Sigmund Freud's daughter. So she too has written a number of books based on psychoanalysis. So Lacan is actually quoting from her. And he says, so there are two I's, the specular I into the social I. So specula, the term means having the properties of mirror. So that is actually the mirror stage into the social I. So it is actually the formation of I, but the process is very gradual, which means from the mirror stage I towards the social space I. And this is described by Charlotte Burler as infantile transitivism. So by transitivism, it just means a change. So how a small child changes and how a child goes through the processes involving the formation of I, a special kind of identification that is experienced by a child, and the desire for the other comes here. Remember, it's again the same point, the repeated point, that the child sees the image in the mirror. So the child wants to become something like the mirror image. So it is a desire for the other. And remember, there are lots of other concepts which are actually revolving around this. Remember, Oedipal complex, which is again the desire for the parent of the opposite sex. So this desire is something which you cannot control. This desire is there in the unconscious. Sometimes it pops up into the conscious. So see, all these terms are interconnected in psychoanalysis. So again, mirror stage reflects a stage of primary narcissism. Now, narcissistic is actually having too much of self-love. And this narcissism was actually spoken by Sigmund Freud in his initial essays. So in a way, there is an element of fancy, a flight of fantasy which is remaining when the child feels the mirror image as a better image. So there is something called the existential philosophy which is coming up. Now this has to be understood in the light of the surrounding, and Lacan here brings in certain examples from the concentration camps. So concentration form here means the examples from concentration camps, because it was a time during the Second World War, the persecution of Jews, concentration camps, these things were very, very, very popular during the time. So Lacan is actually writing under the influence of these structures. And again, he brings in the concept of Descartes, which is suggested as I think, therefore I am. So this is a selfhood characterized by certainty, consciousness, indivisibility. Indivisibility means we are getting back to the earlier point, totality or a wholesome kind of individuality and knowability. So if you look at the term suggested by Descartes, I think, therefore I am, there is some kind of a certainty. A totality is there, wholesomeness is there, there is this indivisibility is there, and knowability is there. So if you analyze this particular line, it gives you the information that everything is perfect. But for Lacan, there is a difference between the thinking I and the being I. According to Lacan, he says, I think, therefore id is. So see, Freud is getting connected here. Unconscious is getting connected here. Remember the initial stage, the stage of a child which is completely based on the pleasure principle where id is coming. So all these are interconnected and interrelated. I think, therefore id is. Now, when it is working, it is based on the pleasure principle. So, in one way or the other way, the unconscious is acting here. And once when the unconscious is acting out, you cannot really say what is happening because it is not always a perfect condition under which the unconscious works. So, Lacan's ideas were totally different from that, from those that were preached by the previous psychologists and sociologists. So again, he actually concludes by stating that this mirror stage or this ego formation should be understood in the light of the surrounding. We had already discussed it in the previous slide, so just giving it a bit more ideological surveil. This has to be understood in the light of the surrounding means this ego formation is always dependent on the physical surrounding in which a child is grown. So we understand that this other that the child thinks in his mind during the mirror stage is extended to the outer reality, which means the mirror image that the child sees at the age of 6 months or 18 months, this mirror image becomes an extension of the exterior world or the outer world. So in short, Lacan is trying to prove that this mirror stage has got a very strong influence in the formation of selfhood. So just understand the main concept, the main idea, study a few technical terms in association with the essay, remember a few points. You can easily write an essay or a few paragraph questions based on this. Now, after going through this video, if you get back to the essay and then read the essay, you will get more insight based on this essay. So thank you very much for your patient listening. In case if you have any queries or doubts, please do not hesitate to connect with me. So thank you one and all. Thank you.